Hey everyone, this is Steve from the App Innovation Global Black Belt team. Today we're going to be talking about Project KAITO, the Kubernetes AI Toolchain Operator. We'll show how it works in AKS. We'll deploy an AKS cluster with the Toolchain Operator enabled. We'll deploy a workspace and run through what the components of that are, and hopefully you'll come out of this understanding a bit more about what KAITO is and how it can help you. So let's jump into it. So if we take a look, Project KAITO is an open source project. You can go and contribute to, you can raise issues, you can reach out to the community on it. The goal of Project KAITO is to help make inference deployment simpler, right? So you have all these large language models that are out there, all these mainstream models like Falcon, Llama 2, that you might want to run in your Kubernetes cluster. Maybe you could run these things in a managed service, but in a lot of cases you need to have those and be closer to your workload or in a more secure environment for whatever reason that may be. So KAITO is meant to help with that challenge. KAITO involves two main components. So there's the node provisioner, and the node provisioner is using Carpenter behind the scenes, and its job is to deploy a new node pool into your cluster based on a request that it receives from the workspace operator. The workspace operator takes a look at the workspace CRD that you submit, the request that you submit. You in that CRD will specify the node type that you want and the model that you want, along with some other parameters you can optionally pass in. And the workspace operator will check that and validate that for you to say, hey, does this model operate correctly on the node type that you're trying to deploy? And it'll do some of that validation for you. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We're actually going to use the AKS documentation, although I've created my own version of it just to kind of follows my process. So you can take a look at these docs. We'll share a link in the notes. And what we did was we took this and created this blog post off of that documentation. Okay, so if I take a look at this and actually jump into another window here to do this, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to deploy a new AKS cluster. I can go grab these values here. I'm going to set some parameters. I already created the resource group. I also already created an Azure Container Registry. So as part of this process, we're actually going to import an image into the container registry, which we'll see in a minute. So I'm going to save some time on that. So I pre-provisioned that. Let's go ahead and create this AKS cluster. Okay, as this AKS cluster is provisioning, let's talk about what the components are that are included there. So the AI Toolchain Operator is obviously installed. We have that included there. We also have the OIDC issuer. So because the Toolchain Operator and the node provisioner are going to be working against the Azure subscription to deploy a new node pool, the identity that the AI Toolchain Operator uses needs to have certain permissions against the subscription, which we'll set later. We are also going to take the service account that the KAITO operator uses, and we're going to federate that with the managed identity that KAITO creates for you. Down the road, as this goes generally available, I imagine some of those steps you won't need to do manually, but for now, we will need to implement that. Okay, so once this cluster is created, we'll move on. I'm just going to pause for a second here while that cluster creation completes. Okay, while the cluster creation finishes up here, let's talk about the identity setup. So I mentioned this a little bit before. So the GPU provisioner does need the ability to interact with the Azure Resource Manager to deploy new node pools into the cluster. So to do that, we're going to get the resource group ID here. We'll get the managed cluster resource group name. We'll get the identity that was created for KAITO. So this is just a standard default naming that it uses. So AI Toolchain Operator followed by your cluster name. We'll use that to get the principal ID of that managed identity. And we're going to grant that managed identity pretty broad rights. We're going to give you contributor rights on this resource group. But again, over time, I think as this goes GA, we'll see that refined a good bit further. Because we're using workload identity, we need the OIDC issuer. So this is so that tokens that are received by Azure Active Directory, now known as Entra ID, can be validated as they were issued by the cluster. The cluster is going to provide the issuer URL that can be used to validate those tokens. And then we'll do the federation of that credential here. So you can see we have the Kubernetes service account for the KAITO GPU provisioner, and we're going to associate that to the KAITO identity that was provisioned by KAITO itself. Okay, now that our cluster's provisioned, let's go to that step. So let's get my cluster credentials. I can check on my cluster. That looks good. Okay, we have 3-node cluster. Now let's get these values. Resource ID, resource group ID, that is. Get the resource group for the cluster, the managed cluster side. set the KAITO identity name, get the principal ID. Let's do that initial role assignment. Okay, get the OIDC issuer URL. And now we can finally federate that credential. Okay, so now what that's doing, if I were to jump over here to my portal, take a look at my AKS cluster, I'll look at the managed cluster resource group, the MC_resource group. And you can see here's this AI Toolchain Operator, managed identity. That's the identity that we're going to federate here. Okay. Now, once that's done, if I go and take a look at the pods for KAITO, clear this, you can see one's still in a crash loop back off. We need to reset that pod before this, this identity federation works. So let's go ahead and restart that. Okay, and now we can check the pods again, and we should see them starting to run. This will take a minute before it's up and running, but that looks good to go. Okay, so the Azure Container Registry I mentioned was already pre-provisioned, and I did that because what I wanted to do for this was import an image from the Microsoft Container Registry into my own private registry. Typically, if you were running your own environment, you can pull things from public registries, but it's generally the best practice to not do that. You really want to have things in your own private registry so you can do image scanning and all those good things on it. So we do that import here, and this command is how you would do that. I've already done that. And then I'm going to attach the ACR to my AKS cluster. So let's go and hit attach on there. And that'll take a minute or two. And again, we'll pause for a second while that attach completes. Okay, our container registry is now attached. I'll clear that screen. And now we get to do the fun part. We'll deploy the model. So to do this, I'm going to generate a manifest file. Okay, so in the manifest file, I do have to pass in the machine size. So let's go ahead and set that. You do need to make sure that you have quota for the machine size, obviously, that you're trying to leverage. So that's something to make sure you're taking a look at. And we'll just generate this file right from here. And we'll take a look at it after that. Let's take a look at the file. Okay, so here's what that file looks like. So this is the workspace CRD that's provided by KAITO. We're just going to give it a name. We're going to specify what the instance type is. And we could actually leave it at that. You don't actually need these preset options. If you don't set the preset options, it's just going to pull the Mistral image from the MCR. But in our case, we want to pull it from the private registry. So we've passed that value in here that points to our private ACR. So let's go ahead and deploy that. All right, so now the workspace should be starting to deploy. I can jump to this other screen here. Let's do a watch. Okay, so in this watch, what you're seeing here at the top is the workspace provisioning. You can see we have the instance type specified, the status of the resource, the status of the inference itself, and the total status of the workspace. Obviously, none of those are set because all the gears are turning in the back end. So what's happening behind the scenes now is the GPU provisioner is going off and provisioning that node. So in another minute or two, we should see the node come online and be ready. And then next, we'll see a service and a pod start to spin up, and that pod will take a few minutes to deploy. So while that's going, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause this. And I'll come back once everything's ready to go. Okay, that image is just about ready. Took a little while. Mistral is a large image. Let's go take a look at the next steps here. So to actually go and test this, we can go ahead and grab the cluster IP. So grab this. Okay, remember this is a service of type cluster IP, so it's not going to have a external endpoint for it. So we're actually going to test it from inside the cluster. So we go ahead and we'll send a curl request to that with a question. And we got a response. All right, so everything looks like it's running well. So let's take another look really quick. So we do get service and pods. We can see, here we go. We have our Mistral 7B endpoint here and our Mistral 7B pod up and running. If I do get nodes, we have our node that was deployed for us. I can take a look at that node. And there's the node type that we chose. Okay. And now to tear it down, just do the reverse. Okay, delete Mistral, and that's going to pull the whole workspace down. If I watch that, I'll see all of those things start to get removed. My pod is terminating, my service is terminating, and the node is being removed for me. So all in one workspace deployment, one workspace removal, everything's managed for me. All right. So again, you can take a look at this. You can run through this blog and test this out yourself. You can also obviously take a look at the AKS documents. Make sure you enable the extension for the CLI. Make sure you register for the feature while it's in preview. And again, I think over time we'll see more of the steps kind of streamlined and more of the identity management bits managed for you, I hope, over time. And yeah, it's looking like a really great tool to help enable you with running inference models on AKS. So I hope this was helpful. And until next time, thanks for watching. Take care.